Welcome to the Running Library. Today we're breaking down the key ideas from Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Let's get into it. Your brain is built to make mistakes, predictably, repeatedly, and even when you're sure you're being rational. In Thinking Fast and Slow, Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman explains why that happens, and how a lot of our everyday confidence is actually a mental shortcut, wearing a suit. Kahneman's big idea is that we don't have one mind. We have two modes of thinking. He calls them System 1 and System 2. System 1 is fast, automatic, intuitive, emotional, and constantly running in the background. It's what lets you read simple words, recognize a face, or instantly feel that something seems off. System 2 is slow, effortful, deliberate, and logical. It's what you use to do careful math, compare complex options, or check yourself when you suspect you might be jumping to conclusions. The book is essentially like a tour of how these two systems cooperate and how they clash. System 1 is incredibly useful, but it's also biased. System 2 can correct those biases, but it's lazy, easily tired, and often rubber stamps whatever System 1 suggests. Kahneman walks through decades of research, much of it with his collaborator, Amos Tversky, showing the specific patterns behind our judgment errors, why we misread probability, why we trust confident stories, why we fear the wrong risks, and why we're so bad at predicting what will make us happy. So who is this book for? It's for anyone who makes decisions, so everyone, but especially people who negotiate, hire, invest, manage teams, design products, diagnose problems, teach, or simply want to understand why smart people do dumb things. It's also great for readers who enjoy psychology and are willing to sit with ideas that are a bit uncomfortable, because the book's message is not, you're rational when you try harder. It's, your mind has default settings, and willpower isn't enough to fix all of them. Who is it not for? If you want a quick, breezy self-help read with a single simple framework and a few motivational stories, this might feel dense. Kahneman isn't trying to hype you up. He's trying to show you the machinery. Also, if you're looking for a step-by-step formula that guarantees perfect decisions, you won't get that. The value here is awareness and better habits, not perfection. Now let's get into 6 key takeaways you can actually use, with examples that make them stick. First takeaway, your intuition is powerful, but it's not a truth detector. System 1 is amazing at pattern recognition. It's how experienced firefighters sense danger before they can explain it, or how a seasoned teacher can tell when a classroom is about to get chaotic. But the same instant sense can produce confident nonsense when the environment is noisy, random, or unfamiliar. A simple example. You meet someone and instantly think, they seem competent. What happened? Your brain grabbed a few cues. Tone, posture, vocabulary, maybe attractiveness, and converted them into a global judgment. Kahneman argues that System 1 is a jumping to conclusions machine. It creates a coherent story fast because coherence feels like truth. The practical move is not to distrust all intuition. It's to ask, is this an area where I've had lots of feedback and practice and where patterns are stable? If yes, intuition might be valuable. If not, if it's hiring based on a first impression, or predicting markets, or judging a strain, your intuition may be mostly vibe. Second takeaway, what you see is all there is. Kahneman uses this phrase to describe how we make judgments based only on the information in front of us, while ignoring what we don't know. System 1 builds the best possible story from available scraps, and then stops searching. It doesn't naturally say, wait, what evidence am I missing? Example. You read 2 glowing testimonials about a product and decide it must be great. Your brain treats that tiny sample as representative, because it doesn't feel the absence of the hundreds of reviews you didn't see. Or you hear one dramatic news story about a rare event and suddenly it feels common because the story is vivid and available. A useful habit here is to deliberately widen the frame. What would I need to know to be confident? What's the base rate? How often does this happen in general? What would someone who disagrees with me point out? Third takeaway: we substitute hard questions with easy ones without noticing. When faced with a difficult question, System 1 often swaps it for a simpler question and answers that instead. Kahneman calls this substitution, and it's one of the most important ideas in the book. If the real question is, how happy will I be if I take this new job? Your brain might substitute, how excited do I feel about it right now? If the question is, how strong is this argument? You might substitute, how much do I like the person saying it? If the question is, how likely is this plan to succeed? You might substitute, can I imagine it clearly? This is why charismatic presenters can win over rooms with weak logic, and why we can feel certain about outcomes we haven't actually evaluated. The fix is to name the hard question out loud. Literally say it. The question is not whether this sounds good. The question is, what are the odds, and what are the costs if I'm wrong? Fourth takeaway: your brain is terrible at probability, especially with small samples. Kahneman shows how easily we overinterpret small amounts of data. We see patterns in randomness. We think a short streak means something deep. We confuse representative with likely. Example: a manager interviews 3 candidates from one school who perform poorly and concludes the school produces weak hires. Or an investor sees a fund outperform for a year and assumes skill, not luck. Or you try a diet for a week, drop a couple pounds, and conclude it works, ignoring water weight, normal fluctuations, and longer-term trends. Kahneman's point isn't that data is useless, it's that our instincts about data are unreliable. We need base rates, larger samples, and humility. When you catch yourself making a big conclusion from a small number of examples, that's a cue to slow down and look for broader evidence. Fifth takeaway: losses loom larger than gains. This is a cornerstone of Kahneman and Tversky's work on prospect theory. People tend to feel the pain of losing something more strongly than the pleasure of gaining the same thing. That asymmetry shapes choices everywhere: money, relationships, negotiations, and even habits. Example: you might avoid selling a stock at a loss because realizing the loss feels worse than the potential benefit of reallocating to something better. Or in a negotiation, a discount can feel like a painful concession to the seller, even if it's rationally small. Or you keep clutter you don't need because throwing it away feels like losing it, even though it's costing you space and attention. Understanding loss aversion helps you design better decisions. You can reframe choices in terms of long-run outcomes rather than immediate emotional impact. You can also anticipate it in others. If you want someone to change, it may be more effective to show what they're losing by not changing than what they could gain. Sixth takeaway: we remember experiences differently than we live them. Kahneman distinguishes between the experiencing self and the remembering self. The experiencing self is you in the moment. The remembering self is you looking back, telling the story of what happened. And the remembering self is the one that makes many of your future decisions. The remembering self tends to overweight 2 things: the peak moments and the ending. This is often called the peak-end rule. It also tends to neglect duration. How long the experience lasted matters less than you'd expect when you remember it. Example: a vacation with one awful day at the end can be remembered as a bad trip, even if most of it was great. Or a long medical procedure that ends gently can be remembered as less terrible than a shorter one that ends painfully. In everyday life, this affects how you plan, what you repeat, and what you avoid. The practical insight is that if you're designing experiences, events, meetings, customer journeys, even family weekends, pay attention to the ending and the emotional peaks. And personally, if you're judging your life based on memories, remember that your memory is a storyteller, not a camera. Now, with all of that, what do you actually do differently tomorrow morning? Here's a simple 3-step action plan inspired by the book. Something you can apply whether you're making a big life decision or just trying to think a little more clearly. Step 1. Install slow-down triggers for high-stakes moments. You won't run System 2 all day. It's effortful. But you can choose specific moments where you force a slowdown: hiring, major purchases, important emails, conflict conversations, medical decisions, financial commitments. Create a short checklist question like, am I tired, rushed, or emotionally charged? Because those are perfect conditions for System 1 to take over. If the answer is yes, delay the decision if you can, or at least add structure. Write down options, pros and cons, and what evidence would change your mind. Step 2. Use base rates and outside views whenever possible. When you're forecasting how long a project will take, how likely a plan is to work, how much something will cost, your inside view is your story. Kahneman argues that stories are seductive and often wrong. The outside view asks, what typically happens in similar situations? So instead of, how long will I take to finish this, ask, how long do people usually take to finish something like this? Then adjust from there. Even a rough base rate can beat a confident narrative. Step 3. Preempt your own bias with a pre-mortem. Kahneman popularized the pre-mortem technique. Before committing to a plan, imagine it failed and ask why. Not what could go wrong in a vague way, but it's 6 months later, this went badly. What happened? This gives System 2 a job and invites dissenting information. It also makes it safer for teams to raise concerns because you're not accusing anyone of being negative. You're doing a structured exercise. If you do only one thing from this book, do the pre-mortem. It's simple, and it directly counters the brain's love of overconfident stories. To wrap up, Thinking Fast and Slow is a book about humility, specifically humility about your own mind. Kahneman doesn't say we're doomed, he says we're predictable, and if you can spot the predictability, your snap judgments, your love of coherent stories, your fear of losses, your confusion about probability, you can design better decisions, better systems, and better habits. If you want a single line to carry with you after the last page, it's this. When something feels obviously true, that's often the exact moment to pause and ask what your fast brain is doing. This has been the Running Library. If you want more psychology and book breakdowns that help you think clearer without the hype, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. If you found this summary helpful, subscribe to the Running Library for new insights every day. And tell me in the comments what book or article you want next.